This week, Keith is in the land down under, so I'm joined by April Wright. We're going to be discussing a jQuery plugin that's been exploited for years, finally getting patched. A remote code implementation flaw found in Medtronic Cardiac Programmers, hackers hiding in cryptocurrency, malware in Adobe Flash updates, and the government is finally rolling out two-factor authentication for federal agency domains. And Disney is helping women from across their company to become developers. As I said, special co-host is April Wright joining me today, so stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Application Security Weekly. This is a Security Weekly production. Layered Insight is the industry's first embedded security approach for containers. Trusted by Global 1000 enterprises to secure their containerized applications, it's the only solution that requires no root privileges, has zero dependency on the underlying infrastructure, and is fully portable across any container environment. Unify DevOps and SecOps, enabling the rapid development of containerized applications without worrying about security. To learn more, please visit layeredinsight.com/ASW. Rapid7 powers the practice of SecOps. Using shared data, analytics, and automated workflows, SecOps unites IT, DevOps, and security teams to make security an outcome of innovation. Rapid7 combines technology, expertise, and advocacy to drive vulnerability management, application security, incident detection, and log management for more than 7,000 organizations worldwide. Power up your SecOps practice with a free trial at rapid7.com/securityweekly. What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 36 of Application Security Weekly for October 22nd, 2018. I am not your host, Keith Hoodlet. I am, in fact, your host, Paul Asadorian, joined remotely by none other than April Wright. April, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Great to be back.
Yes, nice to have you. So I have someone to talk to, and I'm lucky it's someone as fabulous as you, April. So this is going to be a lot of fun, as usual. We're trouble when we get together on the show, too. I was thinking about that earlier when Sam told me that you're the co-host today. I'm like, oh, this is trouble. Did you have a good time at DerbyCon? Last time I saw you was, in fact, at DerbyCon.
Oh, it was great. Yeah, it was a really good DerbyCon. It was a little weird in the new venue, but overall it was excellent.
Now, did you give a presentation?
I did. I gave a training and a presentation.
Oh, that's right. That's awesome. So you were busy while you were out there.
I was.
And busy having fun, too. I think I saw you one of those more fun moments where I was like, I'm going to go back to my room now. And then I walk across the lobby. I'm like, nope, I'm going to stay and chat for a while and go to bed much later than I should.
LobbyCon was in full effect.
It was.
At both hotels.
It was awesome. Just a quick announcement before we get into it. Join us for our webcast with Signal Sciences titled Which Way You Should Shift Testing in the SDLC. The webcast will be held on November 8th from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And really all you need to know, it's going to be me, Larry Pesci, and Zane Lackey. And then just for that reason, to have those two folks and myself all together is going to be a really interesting webcast and good dynamic. So securityweekly.com/Signal Sciences and register today. I really thought in April, in the bugs, breaches, and more section, as we go through these first three, that these brought up all kinds of potential topics for conversation between us. And the first is the jQuery plugin that's been exploited for years is finally getting patched. And I don't know if you had a chance to read this article or you had your kind of take on it.
Yeah. This was kind of, not surprising. So anytime you rely on a third-party piece of code, you're going to have to rely on their patching as well. Are you more secure if you develop your own jQuery type thing? Probably not, even though this was pretty big and out there. The funny thing about it was that it wasn't actually a problem with jQuery per se. It was more of a change that Apache made that made it so that jQuery became the vulnerable avenue for attack.
Yeah, that was interesting. So was it Apache changed something that made uploads not work, but the workaround was to use jQuery where uploads still worked? That was the part that was weird to me.
Yeah, it was HT access permissions, basically. I mean, it seemed like something really small, but it turned into something really big. And I think that's really one of the problems when we have, complex systems, is that you never know how things are going to work together. You never know how things are going to break when other things change. This was the theory behind when we had what are they called? When we had like boxes that would just appliances. People would put out appliances, and the appliances would have everything you needed in a certain configuration that you needed, and they'd be really hard to upgrade. So an appliance would have fixed this, maybe.
So many of
but
those
they probably would have updated anyway and had no idea that it happened.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's interesting. They say in the article that the plugin is the second most starred jQuery project on GitHub after the jQuery framework itself, and talk about how jQuery is used all over the place. It's been forked 7,800 times and is used by the popular CMSs and CRMs, including WordPress, Drupal, and Joomla, as its PHP is the back end. And we were talking about this before, and it's interesting, like the history of vulnerabilities with those particular platforms, and then PHP underneath it. I mean, PHP file upload vulnerabilities are used as basically a testing ground when you're first learning application security. It's like one of the first things you do is put up a vulnerable PHP app and exploit the file upload capability, because I mean, in most cases, that is a stepping stone to lots of other vulnerabilities as well, including remote code execution, file inclusion, all of those other vulnerabilities. And here we still are today, and this is stuff we did potentially 20 years ago, and here we are today, and this same technology is still being used, and that's really scary for me that we haven't really worked to replace some of this technology with something more updated.
Well, I mean, Apache has been around as long as I can remember, and it's a pretty mature product. It's actually, it's funny because GitHub runs jQuery itself.
Yes.
Yes, and they said that they weren't affected, but they patched anyway, just to be safe. But yeah, I mean, Apache's been around forever, and to think that a small change like that would have such a big impact down the chain of software that relies on it. I don't know if anybody could have foreseen this or even tried. Yeah, but what's crazy to me is that this has been around for like 3 years. How have we not seen this in logs? How have we not seen this happening in like Blue Team? How has nobody found out about this until today?
Yeah, and the article says they can go back to a YouTube videos that are dated August 2015. Like, how did we miss that? How did we not find that YouTube video? Right, that was my first thought too. Like, how did we miss this? I don't know. And what I kind of think about, speaking of like, it's just been so much time, and we're using the same technology and having all these problems. And there's so many much newer frameworks that I feel can provide a much better level of security. And I haven't researched it personally. I'm curious to hear from our listeners. Like, are there replacements for WordPress that are built on technologies that are more reliable and they're easier to secure, right? In all these new hipster languages. I feel like jQuery was a hipster language, but now it's not, right?
Well, I know that there are replacements that are like commercial, but you're going to have the same open source versus commercial argument where do more eyes on the code make it more secure versus proprietary code. So it's all about like what you feel comfortable with. If you're going to run the most popular software on the internet, like WordPress or whatever, you're going to find that you're going to be attacked more than if you're running the third most popular.
Yeah.
So
no, it's true.
Just having security by by unpopularity.
Yeah.
Thing.
Yeah, well, the WordPress is interesting because it's almost like the open source model, and the ease of which I can add on to WordPress is the thing that hurts it the most from security. Because now you've lowered the bar to publish a plugin or an extension or whatever, and now all of this code is out there, and it's all. I mean, most WordPress plugins have some level of vulnerability in them, and there's been tons of studies done on WordPress plugins. So much so that it's not even worth discussing anymore, because so many people have done, the independent research, because it's all out there and open. Yet I don't see it getting much better, to be honest.
I think they would have to do something that was similar to the Apple Store model. So having vetted apps, having limited use. I don't know. They'd have to completely rework the framework for having plugins in WordPress, because just being community driven means that you're going to get code from all over the place, and it's not vetted by anybody necessarily.
Yeah, and I tend to not lean towards commercial plugins and not some of the open source ones, although that's not a very good strategy on the surface, right? I mean, my thinking is, well, that maybe they'll pay more attention to it because people are paying for it, and they don't want to have a vulnerability because they might lose customers, which in a small shop, I mean, that could be the case in a crowded market, but that doesn't guarantee anything, right?
Right.
There are some guarantees that you're vulnerable if you're running LibSSH of a specific version, which I thought was really, really interesting. And another one that I think has been out there for some time, and I was struggling to understand this one, but they basically posted a tweet that makes it very easily understandable. And basically someone put on Twitter that was like, holy shit. He's like, I don't know much about this protocol, but if I understand it correctly, you can just claim, yeah, I'm logged in and no need to verify, and it'll work. And the reply was, yeah, basically, that's it.
That's exactly it. It's just like any bad coding on a website where you have a variable that's like auth equals 1.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's basically what you're doing with SSH. But it's only with the server. It's not with the client. So if you're not running the server, then you aren't vulnerable.
Yeah, and you wonder how long this has been out there. I don't know if they said it in the article, but they certainly show Shodan as having 3,000 servers on the internet. And I kind of look at libSSH as that smaller, more portable SSH library, and typically I come across it if I'm compiling a security tool or building a container for security tools, and I'm like, oh yeah, I need libSSH, because most of the programmatic ways you're interfacing with the SSH protocol, typically a developer is going to use libSSH, so I've had to include that and compile it, and I've done so just happily, not doing a code review every time I've done it, right? On the internet. And that's typically the use case, and the article does say it's using a lot of IoT devices, or like back in the day you were pointing out, April, appliances.
This is I mean, it's just bad coding. It's putting a lot of trust in user input that shouldn't be there, instead of double checking the user input or keeping the user input from saying certain things. This could have been easily prevented.
Yeah. And I should correct, most of the client library is not affected. It's the server side. You have to be running a server that's based on the libSSH library, which makes more sense that it's in IoT devices. I think of it as a smaller, more portable library, and you could have it in places that you don't know of on your internal network if you're not looking. And that's my concern with the jQuery vulnerability and this vulnerability, is it represents that class of vulnerabilities that can be very difficult to identify in your internal network or in your own internal development processes.
Yeah, and the number of third-party apps and appliances and other things, network devices, everything that uses SSH could potentially be vulnerable. That's a lot of patching. This could take a long time to fix.
Yeah, I think we're fortunate in LibSSH is unless you've changed the banner, I mean that's going to get you some level of visibility. Like the Shodan search shows that the SSH server was compiled with libSSH. But as I've seen in a lot of IoT hardware, oftentimes they're changing or obscuring the banner, so that's not a good test. And then the next way you figure that out is you go start exploiting it in your environment, and that's could be bad for a lot of reasons, is you could crash the service or crash the device. And then if it's successful, that's great. But if it fails, was it really vulnerable or not? Or did your exploit just not work on that platform, right? If the IoT device is an ARM-based device, but your exploit testing is x86-based, then your exploit's going to fail, but not because it wasn't vulnerable, just because your exploit didn't work.
And this is where a least privilege model is going to help too, because if you don't allow root logins, then that's going to limit your exposure. Well, that's going to limit your damage a little bit. If you have renamed root or not allowed logins, or you use certificates instead of passwords, I mean, some of these things are going to mitigate the destruction that this could cause.
Yep. Yeah, and I go back to, in both these cases, right, it being very difficult. If you're developing your own software internally and you've done the threat modeling and you've talked about the security of your project and you're all in agreement, and then you're off to give it to developers to go code something, and they look at the requirements, if they read the requirements, and interpret them correctly. That's a totally different discussion. But they're like, oh, I need to provide SSH in my application somewhere. So I'm not going to write the library myself because that would be silly. I'm going to go get the open source version and include it. If that's not in your threat modeling and not in your visibility of what programmers are including in their software, then you're at a significant disadvantage in your security architecture, in my opinion.
And we wouldn't necessarily want them to write their own SSH library, though. I mean, using the one that's had lots of people looking at it and fixing it and the open source, I think that's going to be a better library that you're going to, better piece of software that you're going to end up with in the end. But the whole point of including defense in depth is so that when something like this happens, you have other controls that are going to mitigate the damage that occurs, so that when the attack happens, when the worst happens, when SSH is vulnerable and just allowing people in, that there are other things in place, like having jump servers, things like that, having like just keeping things off of the internet when you're doing SSH.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, least privilege, and patching everything else as well, so that if they do get in, there's not a whole lot that they can do once they're on the system.
Yeah, what you're describing, I definitely am in tune with. It's more a holistic view of your security, right? And I think that the threat modeling has to take into consideration, like, okay, what if we're using a library and there's a heinous vulnerability in it? I think Heartbleed put that on everyone's radar, or at least it should have put that on everyone's radar, so that you have some process to, as April was saying, reduce your risk, but you also have some process to discover that more easily in your environment and work on remediating it across your code, right? And figuring out where all your instances of libSSH are can be daunting had you not created your SDLC to properly inventory everything that you're using on an ongoing basis. And if you're like, well, how do I accomplish that? Like, it's too late. Like, now you've got to back up and implement that. And of course, there's lots of solutions on the market today that can help with that. But I feel like that's not in a lot of people's planning for their developers today, which gets us talking about all the latest incidents, Equifax being one of them, about that there is risk introduced when you're incorporating these libraries, and it's about having a plan, I guess, to summarize that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that most developers are capable of telling you where in their code they use certain libraries, but they have to kind of forensically go back into their code and tell you that. It's not something that they have a list of, which is something they should have a list of as part of good SDLC hygiene. But it's tricky.
Yeah, because that, I mean, being hackers that we are, we're like, well, that's great. So you're monitoring your source code repository, and as developers are checking things in, there's a process that's making sure that there's no vulnerable libraries in there. But what about that other group that's using a different source control project? And are we monitoring them or not? I don't know. And that's, it's always those exceptions that get us in trouble in security-wise.
Or those legacy software pieces that somebody wrote and they don't work there anymore and nobody wants to touch it because it just works. Like, people don't even understand all the components. But that's never good.
Never good. Never good is people hacking into your pacemaker as well, which I thought this was kind of interesting. I don't know that it was necessarily a flaw in the software, but like basically it sounded like riding on the VPN connection that developers use to update the pacemaker software was more the case here.
Yeah, it said that it used a VPN to establish a connection, but once it checked for the update, it didn't check again to see if it was on the VPN before downloading it, which is kind of a weird vulnerability. But I mean, they mentioned that 8,000 vulnerabilities were discovered across 4 different pacemaker programmers, and that's just pacemaker programmers, which are the things that program pacemakers.
Yeah.
So imagine all of the other devices out there. I don't even understand why these need to be internet connected. Like, why do you need an internet connected pacemaker?
Yeah.
If the workaround is to have a representative come out with a USB and update your pacemaker, why isn't that just how it's done?
Right. But now I have a USB port somewhere? I don't want to know where that USB port is. All right.
Well, that's the workaround. That's how they said that they're working on additional security updates that a Medtronic representative will manually update via a secured USB.
Yikes. And what's the supply chain look like? I mean, there's tons of ways you could potentially get around that. And of course, this has been popularized years ago in the TV show Homeland, I think, right? They attacked the vice president, right. In the pacemaker front. And of course, wireless connectivity is going to be sought after in this case, so that, again, I don't have some kind of external port on my body, right? But that, the authentication and authorization to that network, I think, is what the article was definitely bringing out that's in question, that they could have done a much better job in the name of patient safety.
I wouldn't want something that could be remotely accessed or updated remotely. Or I just want a pacemaker that works. I don't need a pacemaker that I can connect to from my phone. I don't need a pacemaker that my doctor can give me updates to it frequently. I just want something that works.
Right.
I don't think we're ready for connected medical implants that allow us to live. I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. The state of IoT security, while there are some strides in ways that have been in methods that have improved the security of IoT devices, I certainly agree. Like, we're not there. I mean, we all kind of freaked out when like Apple Pay and Android Pay were released, but now we're talking about something that's inside your body that someone could hack. Like, that's a big leap.
Yeah, I wouldn't trust it. If I had the choice between connected and not connected, I know which I would choose, 100%.
Yeah, because in a payment scenario, the worst case is I gotta maybe get a new credit card, right? And the other one is like, I could die. I mean, those are two very, very different results, right?
Right. Yeah, and so there was another article that we had this week about what the FDA is doing about this, and they are taking some major strides to try to make the manufacturers and all the people involved with these types of devices more accountable. But I guess this has to happen in order for it to get better one day.
Yeah. No, the 3-letter government agencies that that start with an F, I think I'm somewhat disappointed, and it doesn't inspire much confidence. I think that they've certainly done some good, don't get me wrong, and there's certainly, benefits to society to having, those regulatory bodies, certainly. But more often than not, I mean, you can point out some pretty glaring holes in their processes. Of course, the FDA isn't like, how did the FDA let it get to this point without more stringent regulations? Is one pretty glaring hole. Like, we're kind of operating after the fact, as April said, we're going to wait for people to die before we have regulations. Like, let's get ahead of that. And the FDA has done some good things within the hospital arena. But I don't know about you, April, but have you been getting a lot of spam calls to your mobile numbers? Has there been like an uptick in that? I feel like there's been an uptick in that recently.
I almost never get spam calls.
You're lucky. You'll have to share how you did that someday, soon, because I get a lot. And I know a lot of people here, and other people I talk to get a lot as well. And the FTC has put down some regulations. So they actually found that they were spoofing prepaid cell phone numbers in your area code and the 3-digit numbers that are after that. And that was a no-no, and they stopped those people. But I'm like, what else are you doing? Because like everyone's seen, except for April apparently, are seeing a huge uptick in this and putting software on their phones to help, prevent against it. I mean, so much so that like I want multiple phones or a phone with multiple SIM cards, and just I'm going to get a new number. And that's the one I give out to people. And then hopefully that doesn't get leaked out and get spam calls, although I'm sure it will because a lot of these are automated.
So I use Google Voice, and I don't know if they filter a lot of it out or something, but I mean, even on that number versus my mobile number, I almost never get spam calls.
You're lucky. You've probably been really good about not publishing your number too.
I have opted out of virtually everything that one can opt out of on the internet in terms of people search and things like that. Yeah,
I've done a poor job of that too. I know, like when you go to retail and you go buy something in the store, and they're like, "What's your phone number?" I'm like, "What? Like you ask me on a date? Like what? I'm buying something at a store. Like I'm buying a couple of tools at Home Depot. What do you need my phone number for?" And obviously that's contributed. I think they're selling those lists, is my guess.
So I have 2 numbers that I'll give out when asked, and I don't want to give out my number. One of them is it's like an app on my phone that gives me a burner number, and I can have multiple burner numbers, and then I can just destroy them when I'm done. There's also a phone number that you can either give to people or forward people. Once you're already on the phone, you like hang up, or you hit pound and then or flash, and you do some stuff. And I have instructions on my computer. Nice. And it transfers them to basically they get rickrolled on the phone.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I want that. That's clever. I definitely want to rickroll all those spam calls. And other people that just call me randomly too. I would just rickroll them just for fun. Not you, of course, April. I would never do that.
I'll have to tweet that out later.
Unless you did that to me first, and then we would just be in a rickroll battle. Like, no, I really need to talk to you. No, it's just too much fun. That can be too much fun. All right, so at that, I'm going to take a short break here. We don't have a formal guest for the show, so we're going to do stories, but we're going to take a short break now and come back and finish talking about some of the stories in the news, including, of course, Facebook, because we can't have a show without talking about Facebook. Stay tuned.